Good morning and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Today it's time to move to the second generation of this family we are following through the story of Genesis and focus on Isaac. And I have to say, of the four generations that we will explore this week, Isaac's story is the most bare. There aren't many details about Isaac or his story. In fact, most of his story is found in how he connects with others. He serves as a bridge connecting Abraham and Jacob. And maybe we can connect to Isaac's story right there in our own calling to be bridges between people who differ and to be bridges of outreach and love because God loves us. Of course, part of his story is really significant to the Abraham story. Isaac's birth was clearly an act of God, and the sacrifice on Mount Moriah is almost more important than I can say. Sometimes I speculate on how that event affected Isaac. We know it was a demonstration of Abraham's faith, but the Bible never says anything about what Isaac thought about it. How did he feel about his father's willingness to sacrifice him on an altar? We don't know. The next thing we hear about Isaac, Abraham is old, and before he dies, he wants to make sure Isaac has a wife. Now, we would find this uncomfortable nowadays, but in those days it was considered the right thing to do to marry a relative. Because Abraham had gone off to Canaan, the only relatives he has are back in Mesopotamia. So Abraham sends his servant, Eliezer, to one of his relatives there to find a wife for Isaac. When Eliezer arrived, it was late in the day, at the time of day when the women came to the well to draw water for the evening. Eliezer made his camels kneel down there and prayed to God that as the town's women came out, he would ask one of them for a drink of water, and that the one he asked and who gave him a drink would be the one God had chosen for Isaac. And sure enough, before his prayer was even finished, he saw Rebekah coming out with her water jar, and she gave him a drink and watered his camels as well. And that's when Eliezer discovered that she was indeed Abraham's relative. It was a perfect match. And Rebekah went with Eliezer back to be Isaac's wife. Once more, however, we have a story of a woman who couldn't seem to bear children. However, Isaac prayed for his wife, and she did conceive, and it turned out that she bore twins. And that's part of tomorrow's story. For the rest of his life, Isaac will be quiet. Let's try that sentence again. For the rest of his life, Isaac was quietly faithful to God. He lived in Canaan with Rebekah, moving from time to time, but always staying in the promised land. The Jews give Isaac credit for inspiring their evening prayer because the Bible speaks of Isaac going out and meditating in the field late in the day. And I think perhaps Isaac is one in these four generations of Genesis that we can most relate to. The others have great stories of faith, but Isaac's story is perhaps a bit more like our own story, a life of quiet, consistent, abiding faith in God. Still, it was through Isaac that God's promise and plan continued, just as it does in us. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.